and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I am here to share my Jane Austen July 2022 TBR. So I am, of course, very excited to be participating in Jane Austen July again this year. It is hosted by three lovely booktubers, Katie from Books and Things, Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia from the Spinsters Library, and it has been going on for a number of years now, and I have participated in some capacity for quite a few of those years, and it has really become a pinnacle of my reading year along with events like Booktober. So I am super excited to be diving back into the world of Jane Austen this summer, and of course I have a huge TBR that are full of books that I'm super excited for. I have probably more books than I'm going to be able to read, but I thought I would share the books that I definitely want to get to for each prompt, and then a couple of the bonus books that I will get to if I have time. So in honor of Jane Austen July, I have my most Regency-esque little puffed sleeve square neck dress on, and I've cut bangs since I was last active on Booktube, so I'm feeling very 2005 Pride and Prejudice Charlotte Lucas chic. That's like my Jane Austen July aesthetic this year, and I have a ton of Pride and Prejudice related content that I'm hoping to read this year, so it seemed very fitting. So without further ado, I will get into the prompts. The prompts stay the same every year, so it's kind of fun planning. As soon as I watch people's TBRs from this year, I'll already be planning my 2023 TBR. But the first prompt is to read one of Jane Austen's main 6 novels, and this year I am going to be rereading Pride and Prejudice. This is actually the group read this year, so there is a read-along schedule and discussion group on Goodreads, and the group will be reading this book over the first half of the month, so I will definitely be checking out those discussions. I'm planning to listen to this on audiobook this year. I signed up for an Audible trial around Christmas time, and one of the books that I redeemed with my free trial credits was the Rosamund Pike narrated audiobook, which I have heard nothing but good things about. So I'm so excited to be finally rereading Pride and Prejudice and to be listening to this audiobook that I already know I'm going to adore, because Rosamund Pike is, well, she's one of my favorite actresses, and I think she's going to be fantastic at narrating Pride and Prejudice. This book and its many adaptations are what first got me interested in Austen many years ago, but it's actually the last of her 6 novels that I actually physically read, so it is definitely time for me to do a reread. So I'm definitely looking forward to being back into the witty world of Pride and Prejudice. And then the second prompt is to read something by Jane Austen that isn't one of her 6 novels, and for that I'm going to be reading The Watsons, which is one of her unfinished novels. This is kind of poignant for me because it's going to be the last piece of work beyond her letters and a couple scraps of juvenilia. It'll be my last unread Austen. I've already read her main 6 novels, Lady Susan, Sandington, A History of England, so I'm kind of running out of unread Austen material. So this will be kind of the last significant piece of writing of hers that I have to read for the first time. I got this copy out of my library. It's a bind-up that has Sandington and a few other pieces, Lady Susan and The Watsons. So The Watsons is this last 60 pages or so of this book. I don't know very much about The Watsons. I believe our main character is Emma Watson, and she has been educated by some aunts or some other family members, and then she has to return to her family of origin, and that's where the story kind of unfolds a little bit and then of course is not finished. So I have heard from a friend that really enjoyed The Watsons earlier this year, so I am very excited to be reading it, even though it does kind of finish off my unread Jane Austen material. So prompt number 3 is to read a nonfiction book about Jane Austen and or her time period. So for this prompt, the one book that I definitely want to prioritize is The Real Jane Austen, A History in Small Things by Paula Byrne. This is a book that I saw on a lot of people's TBRs last year and have been waiting basically the whole year to read. And from what I understand, this is a biography of Jane Austen, but told in a unique fashion where each chapter focuses on some small thing that she had in her life, whether that be a knick-knack, jewelry, a writing desk, a pen, etc., and kind of explains aspects of her life and society at the time that contributed to her having that item in her possession. So I think it talks a little bit about class, about trade networks, etc. I think it sounds like there's going to be a lot of fascinating social history included in this book, which is one of my favorite types of nonfiction to read, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to love this book. The other book that I know for sure that I'm going to be reading that is nonfiction is Jane Austen's Genius Guide to Life, On Love, Friendship, and Becoming the Person God Created You to Be by Haley Stewart, and this is going to be my devotional reading during the month of July. I've followed the author Haley Stewart on social media for a long time. She has a blog, Carrots for Michaelmas, and a podcast that she hosts with her friend Christy called Fountains of Carrots podcast, and I have really enjoyed her insights into literature in both her blog and her podcast, so I think I'm going to really enjoy this book. And this book basically has a chapter for each of Jane Austen's main works and kind of extrapolates some life lessons and virtues and character traits that we can take from those books. So we have The Life and World of an Underestimated Genius is chapter 1, then chapter 2, Mr. Darcy Learns to Laugh, Knightley Speaks Frankly, Fanny Price and the Stronghold of the Self, Marianne Follows Eleanor, Catherine Learns to Read the World, The Wentworth of a Soul, and then A Wedding Feast and a World Renewed. So on the back it says, there's no better life coach than 19th century British novelist Jane Austen. In this uniquely Catholic take, Stewart reveals Austen's thoughtful, deeply personal exploration of human relationships, including with God, in her 6 novels. Stewart's insights take you on a journey that is both literary and spiritual, revealing how Austen's characters and themes can lead you to discover and become the person God has called you to be. So that is going to be what I am reading slowly throughout the whole month. And then I have 2 more nonfiction books that I'm hoping to get to, although that is a lot of Austen-related nonfiction if I end up reading 4 nonfiction books in Jane Austen July. The first of my kind of lower priority reads is Jane's Fame, How Jane Austen Conquered the World by Claire Harman. And while this book does have some biographical content about Jane Austen, it's really focusing on what happened after Jane Austen and how she has become this internationally renowned, beloved literary figure all over the globe today. So the blurb for this book describes it as being a biography about Jane's cultural influence and impact. And I think this is going to be a really interesting and somewhat unique take. Most of the biographies I have read maybe mention in passing a little bit about Jane's popularity, but to have a whole book that is kind of academically focused on that question, I think will be a unique insight into my Jane Austen July reading. And then another book that I stumbled across at my local library is A Jane Austen Education, How 6 Novels Taught Me About Love, Friendship, and the Things That Really Matter by William Deresiewicz. This book is a bit of a memoir of the author's journey with Jane Austen's novels and the life lessons that he pulled from them. It says, an eloquent memoir of a young man's life transformed by literature, A Jane Austen Education explores Austen's novels to reveal the remarkable life lessons hidden within. By blending the misadventures of Austen's characters with his own youthful follies, American scholar William Deresiewicz demonstrates the power of the novelist's teachings and how, for Austen, growing up and making mistakes are one and the same. Honest, erudite, and deeply moving, A Jane Austen Education is the story of one man's discovery of the world outside himself. Before Jane Austen, the author was a very different young man. A sullen and arrogant graduate student, he never thought that Austen would have anything to offer him. But when he had to read Emma for a class, something extraordinary happened. Austen's devotion to the everyday and her faith in the value of ordinary lives changed him in ways he could never have imagined. As he viewed the world through Austen's generous eyes, he was amazed to discover that the people in his life began to develop the depth and richness of literary characters, and that his own life had suddenly acquired all the fascination of a novel. His real education had finally begun. One of the things that really drew me to this book is the fact that it is a man's perspective on Jane Austen's. I think a lot of men, even male academics, write Jane Austen off as being just for women. So I'm fascinated to see how this author's mind was changed and how he found applicable lessons for his own life in Jane Austen's novels. I think this cover is so clever, this Regency paper doll image. So prompt number 4 is to read a retelling of one of Jane Austen's books or a historical fiction book set in her time period. And the book that I definitely 100% would like to get to for this prompt is What Kitty Did Next by Carrie Cablain. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling that focuses on what Kitty did next. I feel like after reading the other Bennet sister and falling in love with that retelling of kind of one of the more obscure Bennet sisters, I'm really curious to see what the author is going to do with Kitty and Kitty's story. Besides Mary, Kitty is one of the more underdeveloped Bennet sisters in the source text. We don't really learn much about her thoughts and feelings, and she definitely doesn't really have her own storyline. And in the book, she really is just following along whatever Lydia does. So I am interested to see where this author is going to take Kitty. I think she would definitely have been impacted by what happened with Lydia at the end of Pride and Prejudice, and that may have impacted some of her personality and her life path. So this book, I believe, is primarily set after the events of Pride and Prejudice, and it says, when Kitty's world unexpectedly expands to London and then to her sister Elizabeth's magnificent estate in Derbyshire, Kitty is overjoyed. Keen to impress this new society, she resolves to improve her mind and manners. She makes new friends, notably Georgiana Darcy, and attracts the attention of more than one eligible gentleman. All goes well until one fateful night at Pemberley, when a series of events conspires to ruin Kitty's reputation as she is sent home in disgrace. Her hopes and dreams are dashed, but Kitty is resilient. She has learned from her experiences, and what she does next will surprise everyone, including herself. Beautifully written in a style that evokes Jane Austen's spirit and time, What Kitty Did Next charts one young woman's struggle to overcome the obstacles of her era and truly find herself. So the other Bennet sisters definitely set the bar high for Pride and Prejudice retellings, but I have equally high hopes for What Kitty Did Next. And then I'm also hoping to get to First Impressions by Charlie Lovett. I read The Lost Book of the Grail by Charlie Lovett earlier this year, and I really enjoyed it. And this book kind of played on Trollope's novels because it's set in Barsetshire, so I think he is definitely a kindred spirit and lover of classics. So I'm looking forward to his take on Austen. First Impressions obviously borrows its title from Jane's original title for Pride and Prejudice, and this book is set in a dual timeline between the modern day and Jane Austen's time period. The subtitle is A Novel of Old Books, Unexpected Love, and Jane Austen. I love the cover with kind of the Regency era great manor house scene, and I'll read some of the flap here. Could Jane Austen have stolen the plot of Pride and Prejudice? That is exactly the question devoted Janeite Sophie Collingwood must answer in this beguiling, brilliantly imagined literary adventure. In a small Hampshire village at the end of the 18th century, a young Jane Austen strikes up an unexpected friendship with an elderly clergyman named Richard Mansfield. Consumed with writing her first novel, Jane finds in Mr. Mansfield an author himself, a perceptive reader of her work and a pleasant companion for long walks through the green fields and narrow lanes near Steventon. In present-day London, recent Oxford graduate Sophie Collingwood has just taken a job at an antiquarian bookshop when two different customers call on the same day seeking the very same rare 18th century volume, the second edition of A Little Book of Allegories by Richard Mansfield. Their queries draw Sophie into a mystery that will cast doubt on the true authorship of Pride and Prejudice and ultimately threaten her life. Working against the clock to uncover the truth, Sophie must also choose between two suitors, Winston Godfrey, a dashing and seductive publishing executive, and Eric Hall, a pushy American academic with whom she shared one stolen, unforgettable kiss. Can she trust her first impressions, or might Sophie be putting her life in the wrong man's hands? So I think that just sounds like a lot of fun. Like I said, I really enjoyed his other book, and he has a really unique way of weaving literary references and little gems for true fans of an author's work to notice and get excited about in the text. So I'm imagining there's going to be lots of little references to Austen to spot in this book, as well as obviously the plotline about Austen herself. And then if I'm still not sick of Pride and Prejudice related content, I'm hoping to read Unequal Affections by Lara Ormiston. This book is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice centered around the concept, what if Elizabeth had accepted Darcy's first proposal? What would their relationship and marriage have looked like without kind of the second half of Pride and Prejudice? I've heard really good things about this, and it sounds like an intriguing premise, so this is one that I may or may not get to depending on how my reading month goes, and if I don't get to it in Jane Austen July, I am definitely hoping to get to it in the next couple of months. And then prompt 5, the last reading prompt, is to read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen, and for this I'm hoping to tackle Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is a book that has obviously been on my radar forever. It was published a year after Jane Austen's death and is credited with kind of kickstarting the science fiction movement. I'm not a big sci-fi reader, but I feel like this is one of those culturally iconic texts that I should have read in my life, so I'm hoping to take advantage of this Jane Austen July prompt to finally read it. I have chosen to read the 1818 text, so hopefully that isn't a mistake. I read like quite a few Reddit threads about whether to read the 1818 or the 1831 text, but in the spirit of Jane Austen July, and because I'd like to see what Mary Shelley's original ideas were before she was kind of influenced by society, I'm going to be reading this original text. Frankenstein, I think, is a story that many people know kind of the basic plot points to. We have Dr. Victor Frankenstein, who bioengineers a monster, and this is that monster's story about trying to live in a world that views him as a monster, and that's kind of all I know about it. But I'm definitely looking forward to finally crossing this one off of my classics that I have to read in my life list. And then there are 2 watching challenges. Prompt number 6 is to watch a direct screen adaptation of one of Jane's main novels, and for this I'm planning to watch the new Netflix adaptation of Persuasion that comes out on July 15th, so right in the middle of Jane Austen July. This is an adaptation that I have been super excited about for a long time. The actor playing Captain Wentworth, Cosmo Jarvis, was actually a YouTube musician back when I was in high school, and I used to follow like all of his music videos, and my sister and I had his music on our iPods and stuff. So when I saw that he was cast, I didn't realize he'd kind of switched to acting, so that was a pleasant surprise, and I'm very curious to see what he's like 10 years after I probably last saw a video from him. The trailer did drop recently, and it has, I think, myself and many Austen fans a little bit apprehensive because it seems like it may be taking a more comedic lens on this story than I think a lot of us were hoping. But of course, I'm still excited to watch any Austen adaptation, and I'm just crossing my fingers that I enjoy it. I also have not yet finished season 2 of Sandington. I've watched the first 2 episodes, but I think the whole rest of the season is now up on Amazon Prime, so I am planning to catch up on Sandington as well. I watched season 1 during last Jane Austen July after reading the Sandington text, and I really actually enjoyed it. It's definitely, I don't think, how Austen would have finished her novels, and now going into season 2 it's even further removed from the source text, but watching it as just a Regency rom-com, it is still thoroughly enjoyable. And then prompt number 7 is the prompt that I always struggle with the most, which is to watch a modern screen adaptation of a Jane Austen novel. I don't really watch a lot of film and television, so there's never really one that I'm dying to watch. I'm thinking I might rewatch the Jane Austen book club because it's been quite a few years now since I've seen it, and I did really enjoy that movie in high school, so maybe I'll rewatch that, or maybe this will be the one prompt that I end up not finishing. So that is my ambitious stack of Jane Austen related reading that I'm hoping to get to in July. I hope if you're participating in Jane Austen July that you have some wonderful Regency Austen-esque novels on your TBR, and I definitely leave me any recommendations if you've read some of the books that I've talked about, or if there's any that I don't have on here that you think I would really enjoy. Until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book. Bye.